Get started. Yep. And just really want to welcome everyone to the third in our series of understanding and responding to mass incarceration 2021 events. My name's Theresa Libby. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a faculty member here at Metropolitan State and one of the co-founders of Understanding and Responding to Mass Incarceration. I teach in our Human Services Department, our counseling programs, and I'm particularly responsible for our grad program that trains students to become both substance use and mental health disorders counselors. So the topic of mental illness, public wellness is of particular importance to me and to my students. So I'm really grateful for us working along this theme for our series. I'd like to let everyone know that we're providing live transcription for this meeting. If you would like to use the live transcription, you can turn it on by selecting it from the More menu. If you're on a computer that's at the bottom of your screen toward the right. I'd like to introduce now Raj Seturaju. Dr. Raj is a faculty member in our School of Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice. He's going to guide us in a brief mindfulness practice and give the land and enslavement acknowledgement. Dr. Raj.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Libby, and the crew. I want to just kind of take this quick minute to appreciate the crew that has worked on this together for a couple of months now. So give it up for the crew. I do not like this view, so I'm going to go to gallery view, at least for me. So wherever you are sitting, standing, right, whatever you are doing, want to invite you to put things away for just a couple of minutes and just feel your feet on the ground and gently focus on your breath. Just breathe in and breathe out. Through your mouth, out, in through your nose, and out through your mouth. I want to gently invite you to close your eyes. And if you're comfortable, as you breathe in, place your hand on your belly so you can feel the air as you breathe in and your belly rises and fills your entire body. And out. Take this minute to just sort of gently ground yourself. I want to invite you to become present for your morning rhythms, sounds, and your body, right? As we wake up, get off our beds, right? Become comfortable with that body, with the rhythms, with the sound. Breathe in over your entire body. Calm your heartbeat. As you breathe in and breathe out, just want to gently invite you to do a quick body scan, right? Start at the top of your head. Kind of check in for some tensions in your body. Sometimes we hold our tensions around our temples, right? At times we hold our tensions in our jawline. Other times we hold tensions around neck and shoulders. So wherever you are feeling the tension, just gently rotate your shoulders, roll out, right? Your neck. And if you're holding it in your jaw, right, open and close your mouth. Right, just a couple of weeks ago, somebody asked me, hey, when was the last time you tested to see how your jaw is doing? I'm like, what? Right, just open, close gently. Roll out your shoulders. At times we hold a lot of tensions in our lower back. So as you breathe in and breathe out, right? Your feet on the ground, just move your body. Right. Bring some heat. Let the blood flow to your core, your back. Release the tensions. Move your body and just test out your knees. Massage your knees. Massage your knees as you breathe in and breathe out. And gently read A Vision for Justice by Michelle Armster. Beautiful sister's work on bringing us to a place where we are grounded, acknowledging our history through her poem, right? Acknowledging the land we are standing on, acknowledging the work that has been done by the enslaved community to prop us where we are. A vision for justice, long, long time ago. Or was it just last year? Or was it just yesterday? A seed was planted. A justice tree seed was planted. Michelle Armster asks, how will it grow? How will this justice tree seed grow? When the ground is poisoned with lies and broken treaties? How will it grow when water spills the blood of African and indigenous bodies? How will it grow when the stories of the settlers is the sun that scorches the earth, burns our backs, and drinks our tears? So as you breathe in and breathe out, just want to invite you to move your head space to your heart space, right? I want to invite you to feel her words, the images. And we know, as Michelle Armster says, our stories are different. They're not the same. And we know that justice is a verb. And we know that it is all about our babies. The work that we do, the places that we go, taking care of our babies, the babies until the 7 generations, the babies we must love in ourselves, in our homes, in our communities, and above all, in our streets. We bear witness. We create safe and brave spaces. We learn from the past to see the future. They say Sankofa. So as you breathe in and breathe out and feel these words, Michelle Armster invites us to tell our stories and share our narratives. And then, maybe then, this moment we are together will become a movement. This moment we are together will become a movement. As you breathe in and breathe out, feel your feet on the ground, right? I want to invite you to listen, to understand, right? Share your thoughts on the chat, right? Let us listen to each other's perspectives. Let us listen to our truth, and let us listen, learn, and lead. All our voices matter, right? Appreciate and gently want to invite you to open your eyes and come into the space. Any words, Dr. Libby?
You're on mute, Theresa.
Thank you, Kristen. Dr. Raj, thanks as always for your beautiful words and the words of that artist, Shell Armstead. I'm sorry, Armster, and the bringing forward those realities and those possibilities. Always appreciate it. Understanding and responding to mass incarceration, or URMI, has been an annual event here at Metro State since 2014. Each year we examine the phenomenon of mass incarceration through a different lens and offer opportunities to get involved with issues, organizing, and activism. Our lens for 2020 was planned to be mental illness, public wellness. And of course, being planned in April of that year, it was canceled due to the pandemic. So we've been moving forward with this series of 4 events, and everyone who registered for this event will receive information about our final 2021 event, which will take place in early November. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the campus offices that are supporting today's event. Thank you to Provost Amy Gort and her office, and President Ginny Arthur and her office. We remain grateful for the strong institutional support for this work. Mass incarceration depends on asserting white supremacy through over-policing and over-prosecution of nonviolent offenses. At the same time, the system also creates for so-called violent offenders an endless loop of incarceration, release without supports, rearrest, reincarceration, and long sentences, while failing to address the sources of violence, including mental health issues arising from historical trauma, adverse childhood events, and the daily effects of racial and economic oppression. This session addresses mass incarceration and mental health through the lens of violence, the ineffectiveness and inhumanity of punishment, and what effective responses look like. In just a moment, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Raj and our panelists, Sasha Cotton and Antonio Williams. Very sorry to tell you that Jafar Braylock, due to unforeseen circumstances, is not able to join us this morning. So we're going to start with the 3 of them, and then around 9:30 we'll begin taking audience questions. So around 9:30, you're welcome to, or just before, you're welcome to start putting your questions in the chat. Some of those questions will be relayed to Dr. Raj by Dr. Derek Krim and Dr. Sharon Brooks Green. That'll continue until 10 after 10, at which point we'll take a short break and then reconvene for our breakout sessions. Just please note, I think you've seen this already, but the event is being video recorded by Metro State and will be made available online at a later date. And as always in Zoom meetings, please be keenly aware of keeping your mic muted. Dr. Raj, turning it back over to you.
Hey. Okay, everybody, let's get this ball rolling. I am so happy to say that I am so familiar with Antonio and Sasha, right? Love to call them a friend. I don't know if they do, but you know, Jeremy, Docs, I don't know you that well, but you know, thanks for being here. Catherine Jones, right? Y'all are amazing. So thank you for being here. I want to real quickly invite Antonio to share who he is, you know, what brings Antonio to this space, right? Y'all, please give it up for David Starks, like one of the pioneers of this conference, right? My brother, my friend, right? So y'all give it up for David Starks. I just see him. Love you, man. Okay, I want to invite Antonio. I could introduce him, but I would rather let us hear his beautiful voice and his beautiful presence here. And we're going to sort of showcase him and Sasha in a minute. So Antonio, you want to introduce yourself? What do you want us to know about you, brother?
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Thank you all for hosting this again. So yeah, my name is Antonio Williams. he, him, his pronouns. What brings me here today is my lived experience. So 2 months after my 20th birthday, I was incarcerated, served 14 years, 2 weeks in Minnesota DOC state prisons. I have been out for 15 months now. 7 years into my incarceration, I began kind of activating on the political side, fighting against the system, exposing corruption, injustice. I won national writing awards. I was published in local newspapers, interviewed by journalists, due to like some protests and things that I helped orchestrate on the inside. Began educating brothers and sisters, because I reached out to people in Shakopee as well, on policy, and how to fight with the pen and the legal system, grievances and those things. Upon my release, I got right active, continued it, began going to protests, began volunteering regularly, helping pass out food at New Creations Ministries Church. Started canvassing, and I'm currently working with a worker-owned co-op with the push to amend the city charter and establish a new Department of Public Safety. And I started my own nonprofit to help people who have been recently released navigate the reentry process. So we provide support, material support, hygiene, clothes, help with resume building if they have fines that are preventing them from obtaining license. We help cover some of that, and just overall being that example, that lived experience person that can really relate to them, because that's what's missing in all of the reentry places is they don't have people running these places who can actually relate on a deeper level. Mm-hmm. And so the credibility alone is allowing me to help in a way that I haven't seen the help out here. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Appreciate y'all can give it up for the brother, right? Use your emojis. Dean Sullivan, thank you for being here. If your morning is going well. Appreciate Maria Kamenska in the house, right? I want to invite Sasha Cotton, right? Amazing sister, doing some amazing work. Y'all, please give it up, and I want to invite Sasha to introduce herself and give us a sense of who you are, Sasha.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Raj and Antonio. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm Sasha Cotton, the director of the Minneapolis Office of Violence Prevention, the founding director. We are in year 2, just completing year 2 of the office. And for those who are unfamiliar, the Office of Violence Prevention was established by the city really in an effort to bring about prevention strategies to address violence in the community that work in and with community. It is, as I often say, a baby. We are growing in our toddler steps. And so we continue to bump our head a bit, but we are also really steadfast on trying to come up with solutions that work better than traditional systems, and that look at ways that we keep our people in our community safe without using the tools of incarceration and arrests. So that is the work that I do currently. Historically, I've worked in violence prevention and community corrections for many years. And I think that's an important caveat. I hold a criminal justice degree and an ethnic studies degree from Metro. So I'm a Metro grad. So I'm an alumni and happy to be back home. I saw Mr. Hatcher earlier, and he has a great contributor to my success at Metro. So thank you to him always. But I'm a hometown girl, first and foremost. I am a Black and Latino woman. I'm a mother of boys, a grandmother of boys, and really keenly aware of the way that our system fails Black and Brown people over and over again. And I think the use and lifting up of a public health approach is really important. And that's what I have practiced for the last 10 plus years in my career, is not looking at this as a sum total of its parts, but really saying that at every intersection, prevention is important. Just in the same way that we would think about cancer, we need to be thinking about the prevention of violence, but we also need to be thinking about the prevention of reoccurrence. And we know, and recidivism. We know that prison doesn't stop recidivism. And so how are we really focused on keeping communities safe versus punishment and the punitive measures that our system has historically used? So I will close with that. And thanks again.
No, thank you so much for sharing who you are with us. I'm hoping that you will put your contact information on the chat so people can kind of advance some conversations with y'all. Antonio, thank you for sharing your information. Right, I know Sasha's like, I don't want any more emails and phone calls. I got so much going on. Right, so much to learn from Sasha. Sasha is a national presence. Right, she's been in so many national conversations about crime reductions and also what's happening in the heart of Minneapolis. I just want to invite us to, right, Antonio and Sasha to share, right, what has life been like in the Twin Cities for you all since the murder of George Floyd? I mean, what has that done to us bringing and centering violence in our community? How has that impacted, affected, changed, right, the conversation about violence in our community? So I want to invite Sasha to share, right, initially.
Yeah, the way that I've been responding to that is the murder of George Floyd is heartbreaking, right? Like for anybody, it's heartbreaking. But it has also put our community at the epicenter and under a microscope that no community wants to be in and under. And I think for us as a new office that's trying to change the paradigm in a community that I think wants change, but is also cautiously optimistic about what that change looks like, the shift in what public safety looks like on the ground, the rapid loss of officers, the increases in violence, I think the real uplifting of community voices saying enough is enough, we can't keep doing what we've been doing, has created an environment that is very challenging. I think it's challenging for everybody, but it is a particularly challenging environment to try to create new work because people want solutions. People want to feel safe. And I think when people, and people deserve to feel safe, let me say that first and foremost, people deserve to feel and be safe. And as local government, we have an obligation to create and provide that kind of safety. But when people feel like they're in a crisis, they often want to default to what is familiar. And just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's what's most effective. And so I think for us as a new, and like I said, a toddler, when George Floyd was murdered, we were still very much an infant. We were less than a year old. I was less than a year, I think, in my role. And so really being thrown into the mix and put on a pedestal, but also on the chopping block as to whether or not these attempts to do something different alongside a system that has been in existence for 150 plus years and hasn't produced necessarily the outcomes around safety that we so desperately need. And that's not necessarily a critique per se, as much as it is just a fact, right? That systems need to change and evolve with the times. And we think that alternatives and violence prevention are an important part of that public safety conversation. And I think that those issues have been amplified and evaluated sometimes in ways that feel harsh and difficult because of the unique times in which we are operating right now. So that's my long-winded answer, Dr. Raj.
Oh, it's a beautiful, beautiful capture, right? You captured some of the realities of what Ms. Iqbal is thinking about, right? And what many others are grappling with as we live with this reality that it happened in our backyard and continues to happen, right? Antonio, what are your thoughts on that? You're on mute, brother. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Dr. Raj. So my perspective is a little different when it comes to the processing of it all. So just taking you into my world, May 25th, 2020, I was in a prison cell. I was at that time 27, 28 days from my release after serving, again, 14 years. And so as I'm thinking about, the natural anxiety of getting ready to come to this world I hadn't been in since I was 19, 20 years old, coming into this world as a 35-year-old man now. And experiencing police brutality, knowing Phong Lee, who was killed. I went to school with Phong Lee, who was killed by the police. So knowing that I'm coming back out to a world that isn't different, and in fact is even more hostile to me than it already was something that, was scary. It was nerve-wracking on top of all of the other things, having a 16-year-old daughter who I desperately wanted to connect with, right? It hit hard because in prison, we look at, there's no distinction between prison guards and police officers, to those of us who are incarcerated. We've seen the same callous brutality, indifference, all of it exhibited by police officers, exhibited by correctional officers. So, witnessing that, it was heartbreaking, but at the same time, I had the transformation already happened within me, where I had dedicated my life to getting out and being a part of change, being a part of uplifting, being a part of, building, the people who I left, and the people who, I'm coming back to, who I never knew. So it was more like a resolute, like, this is still happening. Well, okay, I'm getting out at the right time because I'm ready to do something. I'm able to do something. I'm capable of doing something and contributing to a solution. No matter how small it may be, I can do my part. So that's how I was feeling about it.
Yeah, appreciate taking us into your world, right? Giving us an insight, because we forget, right? There are human beings who live behind those walls, right? Not just a crime, not just a document, not just a record, right? Appreciate sharing your humanity. I want to start with you on this, Antonio. When you think about violence, right? And there was I think there was a show yesterday with John Choi and Jason So, and there was a caller who called in and say, there's a lot of violence happening in the Black community and in the communities of color, right? Why are we not addressing those things? Why are we talking about all these other things? What is that when people say that, Antonio? What is that? How does that hit you? What is that? How does that sit with you in your heart space, in your body, right? What does that mean to you? And what do you want people to know about that?
Again, great question. It depends on who's saying it and which context they're saying it in, right? When you say, "Oh, we're not talking about the violence and the root causes," right? Are you saying that we're not addressing it, the root causes? Then it's like, okay, yeah, I'm with you on that. But if you're saying this is what we need to focus on, the violence in the communities and against, Black on Black, then it's like, wait a minute, we have to acknowledge that there are forces, there are situations that cause this. We have bought this lie that the solution to that is, oh, just lock them up. Locking people up, policing them will prevent it. Oh, no more. Like we've seen this through all the political phases, the different presidents, the different administrations, right? The tough on crime stuff. It doesn't prevent violence. We need to address the things that are really causing it. The lack of opportunity, the lack of resources, the fact that we've locked away a lot of fathers. And so these examples of what it means to be men, real men, real, women, real community members, real family, to hold these principles that we talk about in all of our spaces in society, even in our pop culture. We talk about the loyalty, we talk about the love, integrity, but we don't talk about applying it to ourselves first, right? And these are the things that are missed, and these are the things where people are joining our young Black and brown men and women are joining these. Let's just be real, they're modern age fraternities, right? They join these cliques, these gangs, these organizations because they were taught through popular culture, through other things, school even, that you have to be loyal to a community. You have to have these certain values for your community. Without first learning, you have to have this for yourself. But you have to learn how to love yourself. And with this narrative being reinforced and pushed out here that we're not valuable, Black men, that is, are not valuable, we begin to believe it, right? We see the self-hate out here, where we don't even value our lives because we can just go shoot indiscriminately. We can go and, rob and steal, and because it's all about, getting to that next step, feeding that, that ego desire. So when I hear people talk about violence and, it being the problem that we need to address before anything else, the violence is really the symptom of all the other things that we have neglected.
Thank you, Antonio. Appreciate it. Sasha, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I concur in so many ways. I think that there's been a lot of lip service on this idea of root causes, right? Even, the development of our office, the theory is, oh, we're gonna address root causes. And when we think about root causes, it's really about who deserves a quality life and who doesn't. And that is ultimately the question that is usually bottom line what we're talking about. And so often when we look at the overlap of crime maps, poverty maps, and governmental investment maps, where the bad outcomes are happening are the same places, right? They are also usually the same places where Black and brown people live. That's true in Minneapolis, that's true in St. Paul, and that's true pretty much anywhere in this country and in many ways globally, right? And so, the question is really, what are the requirements of government for my work, right? What are the requirements of government in thinking through an equity lens? And equity means, to me, that means some people have to give some things up, right? Like some people who are used to having things a certain way have to shift from what they think they deserve so that everyone can have an equitable experience. And for us, we would like to be doing more work focused on what I believe are those true root causes. In the public health approach, we look at a prevention pyramid, and the base, so the biggest chunk of that pyramid, is about what creates happy, healthy, hopeful communities, right? So that's quality education, quality housing, access to healthcare, access to employment, access to esteem, right? To feeling like you're able to contribute to your own well-being, to taking care of you, your family, your community in a meaningful way. And we know that when those things don't happen is when the other two layers of the pyramid kick in, right? So The second sliver of the pyramid is what we call secondary prevention in public health. It's what most people would think of as intervention, right? So when we start to see symptoms, we start to see risk. What are we doing? So that's where we start to see, after school programming focused on kids at risk and interventions with families where fathers are out of the homes. Important work, right? But the goal should be to never need those kinds of services.
Mhm.
And then the very tip of the pyramid is what we in public health call tertiary. I like to just break it down to the aftermath, right? It's what are we doing to interrupt the cycle of violence after it's already begun? So for people who are already inundated by the violence, what are we doing? Because we know violence is a cycle, right? Hurt people. So people don't just wake up one day and decide, I'm going to go out and hurt people. It is very unusual. And I think we over account for the fact that it's like constant mental health crisis or constant this. It is mostly circumstantial. Yes, trauma and mental health all play a role in what we see. A lot of it is trauma that goes undiagnosed and unaddressed and then manifests into mental health. But that tip of the pyramid is oftentimes where the focus is. And that is where corrections lives. That is where law enforcement lives. And in many ways, it is where we get stuck at the Office of Violence Prevention because people want to see something that makes them feel safe from government. And I don't want to discount the work that we're doing because I think it's really important. And I think that it offers a different set of solutions, but it shouldn't be our only focus. We have to have work in the moment right now, like the things that we're doing in hospitals and the work that we're doing in community to address the cycle of violence. But if we are not also deeply investing in addressing healthy, happy, hopeful communities, which means every system of government has to change and shift to focus on the least of these, right? The people who are not getting what they need to be at the forefront. And until those systems are revamped, revised, revisited, all of the tertiary work that we do can only accomplish so much because the base is broken. So when I hear root causes, I am deeply encouraged to ask people to put their money where their mouth is, because you won't see the outcome of the investment in root causes immediately. You won't see it in activation programming and projects that are addressing reentry. But if you make the investment now, the generation forthcoming has a chance to be completely different and has a chance to completely see and use and analyze violence in different ways. And if we want real societal change, we're going to have to make those kinds of investments in the long term and be willing to wait for the outcomes.
Wow. Sasha, you can go on. Keep talking. Right? Love to hear your wisdom.
I appreciate that. I want to, I'm curious to sort of see if Antonio has feedback on those thoughts or what his, if it's triggered anything for him. I'm always down for the conversation.
Yeah. Antonio, go ahead, man.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes me think about, we need to catch up with the science, right? We've talked about how the brain isn't fully developed until the age of 26, right? And look at the age of people being incarcerated, especially and we can take Minnesota state prisons out of it. Let's talk about how we're being incarcerated before we're even able to go into a Minnesota state prison. So let me speak from my experience. I was placed in handcuffs at the age of 7, like in a school for a simple, not even a fight, but just wrestling with another kid who happened to be white. But I was taken out and put in the little plastic handcuffs, right? You got me comfortable with handcuffs, police cars, all of that. I ran away from a foster home when I was 14 years old. My auntie said, you know what, I'm gonna get you. Turn yourself in. Guess who showed up? A Minneapolis police car, put me in handcuffs, put me in a squad car, took me to JDC for running away from a foster home. So we're introduced to prison and incarceration long before, and this leaves psychological and emotional trauma and imprints like on us, where it kind of numbs us to it, and it's like, oh, this is what we have to look forward to. It becomes the norm, right? And let's talk about like the trauma we're enduring, in the home, you know, in our schools, you know, out in our neighborhoods. And sometimes, you know, it took me a while to talk about this type of stuff because I'm very hard on myself. I'm harder on myself than anybody could ever be on me. And so I'm always conscious of being looked at like I'm using this as an excuse, because it always comes off like that. When you hear the, you know, the political pundits and stuff, it's no excuse, and that's what they love to use. So it took me a while to just like sit in it and acknowledge it and say, if I went through this level, how many other people went through this? You know, that I ended up doing time with, who I knew, who I went to school with. What were their levels of trauma, right? That caused them to make some choices. And then the fact that their brain wasn't fully developed. And so we weren't factoring in the full consequence that would result from that 30-second choice, that 1-minute choice, right? And then the fact that like prosecutors don't care about your trauma when they bring a case against you. They don't want to hear what you went through, right? It's not their job to do so. And quite honestly, the judges don't either. They don't take that. They have this fake PSI, pre-sentencing investigation, but it's used against you. It's not used for you. And I could go on and on about that.
No, you should have seen Dr. Krim shaking his head when you talked about PSI, right? Like there's so much truth in what we call evidence-based practice, right? And yet all of these tools and instruments have been created to further traumatize, to further punish, right? What some people call, it's not just mass incarceration that people are dealing with, it is mass punishment that we also have to talk about, right? Long years under probation, right? Under surveillance, as Jason Soul would call it. I noticed Laura Jones wrote an interesting question, right? In her statement, you know, Sasha, you referred, you know, people have to give up things in order for us to be in an equitable space. Can you elaborate on that, Sasha, a little bit?
Yeah, and hi, Laura. You know, I think for me, one framing, I feel like I'm so close, is that, you know, if we think about equity as a pie, right, the distribution right now is off, right? Us around the what, right? Like, what are the things, right? But some of it is about safety and comfort, right? We know that so often what people do is focus on their own comfort, right? And that's kind of a human conditioning, right? That we want to be comfortable and we should be able to be comfortable. But your comfort shouldn't come at the cost of someone else's safety. And so often our systems are designed to create a disadvantage around safety from systems for Black, brown, and poor communities. And so we cater to, you know, when you even think about 911 calls, the way people feel about law enforcement and systems often depend on 911, or they're the person that 911 is called on. And that's not about saying that none of these systems have a place or a value. But what I'm saying is that there has historically been an over-reliance on these systems to focus on comfort and not safety. And so when I'm talking about equity and giving things up, that's really part of the conversation that I think is so difficult, even for people who have privilege, whether that's based on race or gender or economic status, to really internalize, because we convert our own mentality around fear, right? Like we become like, I am afraid, without gut checking whether or not that fear is rooted in facts, or if it's just your feeling because you're uncomfortable. And so I think that when we think about equity, that is one of the first questions that I pose to us as a society, is the over-reliance on law enforcement, on 911, on corrections, is deeply rooted in comfort of people of privilege. And that is the base of why our systems are so deeply inequitable. And until people are willing to live in their discomfort, you know, we're gonna constantly be off kilter there. So that's what I can offer right now.
No, thank you, Sasha. Antonio, you know, you were 17, you said, right, when you were sent to prison, right? I mean, what was absent, man? What could people have done to disrupt that pathway to prison, right? A place of violence. Prisons are violent places. They are not, right? We're taking somebody purportedly from a violent place and then placing them in a violent place again in the name of, right? In the name of reform, in the name of whatever we call it, right? Prisons. What is it? And Daniel Surratt talks about this idea. So what would have disrupted your pathway, Antonio?
Great question. And 19.
19.
So my introduction to the lifestyle that led me to prison was crazy. I grew up a ward of the state already. My parents lost their parental rights when I was very young, 5, 6. Many of my siblings were separated, spread out through the system, foster care, group homes, shelters, juvenile lockups, juvenile treatment centers. And so I had this nomadic type of energy and feeling like I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. And I still, quite honestly, I struggle with that to this day, feeling as if I belong somewhere or not, you know? So to me, what could have been different was those communities that I used to hear about. And let's let me be honest about it. I have had some good foster parents, some great foster parents. But I believe, you know, my level of trauma and the way I responded to that love, I didn't know how to respond to that love because it was new to me. And then once, you know, I reacted as a child, right, lashed out, you know, they didn't know how to respond. And so, you know, they, you know, moved on. You know, they didn't owe me anything, but I feel like if we get back to that, like, it takes a village concept, and we start seeing all children as our children, right? And we start responding to all children's trauma and misfortune as if it was our own children's trauma and misfortune, and we loved on these children. If I got loved on by the community and not just in like spurts, maybe things would have been different. You know, I don't know. But I feel like that would have made a huge impact in school. You know, instead of, you know, getting those handcuffs put on me, what if they had someone to come talk to me and pull me to the side like they did the white kid, right? Same thing. We all need to love on our kids, all children, like they're our children. So.
Wow. Sonia, thank you. So, Sasha, any thoughts on that? We're going to open it up, right, as our panelists are sharpening the tools to respond to your questions.
I have lots of thoughts. Yeah, I'm sorry. It looks like I might be having
you were frozen.
Activity issues. Are you able to hear me?
You're breaking out.
You know, thinking about, okay, why don't we move on, and I will try to move around and get to some better.
Yeah, we're hearing you better now. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I'm gonna try to stay right in this position and not move.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Yeah. You know how sensitive Wi-Fi is.
Yeah.
Thinking about sort of the way systems are commingled. Can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Thinking about the way that our systems are commingled, I think is so important. You know, I went to school with the intentions of working throughout the criminal justice system with a deep desire to better understand its workings. And I don't think at the time I fully understood my intentions around re-envisioning or recreating what I knew was I lost a lot of people that I loved to a system that broke them, and that they came home different and worse. And it took a long time for them to look and feel like who I remembered them before they left. And so for me, it was like, I also have an uncle who's an attorney, who was one of the top defense attorneys in Hennepin County, also was a public defender in Hennepin County system. So I was on track. I intended to go to law school. I went to law school, decided midway through that it was a system that I also couldn't be in, right? Because I was either going to be prosecuting Black and brown men and sending them to prisons that I knew could not correct, right? They were not correctional facilities. But I also didn't know how I felt about defending people who have caused real harm without a system of accountability to fix that behavior either, right? So I'm saying that to say that each of these systems, when we think about foster care, when we think about child protection services, when we think about the school system, to your point, your first experience with handcuffs and police cars, none of them are really working for our children, right? They are designed to work for people other than us. And I think that this is the hard part, right? That we have really been focused on making small adaptations to a system that was never designed to work for us. When I reflect back on my first career, second real career job working in probation in Ramsey County, there was a warning that could be given to juvenile clients called the Hammergren warning. And it really gave us carte blanche to make arrests. I mean, I was working primarily with kids who were truant, runaways, and had like co-occurring statuses. They were on probation and wards of the state, or on probation and had a mental health worker. We were putting kids in JDC for like being truant to school, for breaking curfew violation. I mean, the kind of trauma, when I think back on the kind of trauma that I'm responsible for helping to inflict on young people, doing my job, right? Like I'm doing what I'm being told to do as a young professional in my career, but the foresight that I have now as a mother and as someone who has really seen the damage, right, that these systems can do. And now we've swung the pendulum all the way to the other end, right? Where systems are saying, well, the JDC doesn't even take kids for these low-level offenses, but we also haven't built a system that addresses the underlying needs, right? So you've got kids that are coming through who have committed dozens of carjackings, sometimes, what people would describe as violent acts, and we have no place to serve them properly. And we know, again, with brain development, that young people, they need to be corrected immediately. You can't send a young person to processing, send them home for 6 months and expect them to come back before a judge and understand and connect the dots on whatever consequence they're being given from some behavior that they had 6 months ago. It just doesn't work. And so again, I think our systems have a lot of work to do. And part of that is getting our systems to talk to each other right now. And I know it's important to protect data, and I know we need data privacy and all of those things, but it is so hard to get systems inside of just basic governmental function to really work together with a focus on serving the people that need us most. And so, that's what my mind and heart are drawn to when I listen to Antonio talk, and I think about the systems that I've worked in and direct service, and how we just have to do better.
Thank you, Sasha. Questions. I think Ms. Anderson, is it what Chen Anderson asked, did truancy, right, those type of offenses or whatever systems dictate, did they apply across the board for white kids as well, right?
So here's what I'll say, is that I think systems are more deeply understood by the people they're designed to work for. And we know that our systems, particularly in community, in corrections and law enforcement, people of color and poor people are disproportionately represented in those systems. So yes, I certainly, as a probation officer, had white clients, but my overwhelming majority of my clients were young people of color. And I don't think that that's a coincidence either. And I don't think that it's reflective of an an over representation necessarily of bad behavior just by Black and brown kids. I think that, sometimes my kids went to private school. I saw, white children behaving in ways that would be seen as criminal when my boys went to Creighton. If they were Black kids doing that or brown kids doing that, it would have been perceived as criminal, but it was was seen as childlike behavior or bad decision making. And again, that comes down to this lens of equity, right? Are our children even seen as children? When my kids were at Creighton, I'm not dumb, right? I was like, keep your uniform on when you're riding the city bus because people will see you differently when you're wearing that Creighton uniform. I didn't let my son get his ears pierced until he was 17 years old because having his ears pierced was going to make people see him as being older and more delinquent and more urban. And so these are the decisions that as parents of children of color, we're put in the place to have to make, right? How do we, and none of it works, right? Like you can do all of those things and your kids can still be impacted by the system. And so, these are some of the questions that the system needs to be asking itself and that we as society need to be holding it accountable to.
Thank you, Sasha. I know Dr. Krim is ready to jump in. Dr. Brooks Green, right? Question starts. I would just want to say thank you for stating that fact about how, Black and brown kids, especially African-American kids, are adultified in our system often, right? They're often seen as adults when they're children. And how do we work and talk and roll with children versus adults? So thank you. Dr. Krim?
Yes, this is very powerful. Thank you, Antonio and Sasha. I appreciate it. A couple of highlights for me, particularly when I listened to Antonio talking about the processes that we talk about all the time. He really mentions I think some critical realities under that and that we really need to pay attention to. I love what he said about love on him, but he said this, he said, don't love me in spurts, And I remember certain initiatives that we did. So in the community. So thank you. I think my first question is, I think centered on the youth is by Christy Hobbs. And she talks about for many Black and brown girls, sexual violence and abuse is the root, right? Cause of their incarceration and with systems. And she is asking, are efforts currently focusing on disrupting this on the first level of what she's saying, the triangle, while girls and women don't often commit the level, right, of violence in the community, they turn that violence inward, and I am in total agreement of that. And she talks about really agreeing with both of you. You said it a little bit different. I think Sasha talked about esteem and access to esteem. So we're talking about the root cause around sexual violence and abuse. And I would just kind of put it out there to see who wants to start just providing a response to that inquiry from Christy Cobbs.
I can jump in, but I'll try to be brief. I think first and foremost, we are seeing more women and girls as victims of serious violence and perpetrators of what we would consider as serious, gun violence, person-oriented violence than we have ever seen in Minnesota and across the country. And so what we know is that the crimes that women commit are generally deeply rooted in trauma. They're deeply rooted in childhood trauma, and the systems need to be responding to their trauma in ways that are different than they're responding. Well, all of it needs to be different, but certainly these systems are not designed to work for women and girls. And so we are currently funding some very gender-specific work through our hospital-based program and through an outlet at Shiloh that's really focused on mental health and esteem for young women who are systems involved and who have been recent victims of gun violence. And that work is really important, and it continues to grow in the sense that every time they do a session, there are more, it's voluntary, right? So there are more young women and girls showing up, seeking out that gender specific space, that ability to heal and be with other women. And I think we need more of that, but I don't think that we have really gotten to a place where our systems are acknowledging the rate of growth of that population. And I also just want to say before I close that I think sexual assault and sexual trauma are actually much more a relevant part of young boys' trauma than we give it credit for too. And I think, we often really focus on the sexual trauma and sexual violence of young women and girls because it's very real, but it's also far more socially acceptable to talk about. And our young men and boys are being violated in ways that trigger them into a lifestyle that spirals in really bad ways too.
Sasha, I appreciate that. I see many people kind of shaking their head like, yes, let's not just go on one side. Antonio.
Absolutely. I think, like Sasha said, that one size fits all type of approach, really across the board, but it's, the gender specifically, where we think like, especially amongst Black boys and girls, where it's like, they're all, just group them all in the same. There's a specific trauma that Black girls face that no one else faces. There is, and it can be said the other way too. But there's a level of vulnerability that Black girls are exposed to and not allowed to reach because they don't have the same community. Like there's a bunch of Black boys everywhere, right? The Black girls don't have that same community to deal with their trauma, to have their, experimenting and like how boys experiment and talk about stuff openly. I think it's harder and I know this because I have 8 sisters. I'm not just saying, I'm like 8 sisters, 6 boys. And I grew up, like I said, I grew up in group homes, foster homes and all this. So, and it's much harder for Black girls to be believed. They're looked at as being manipulators. I've witnessed this. I've seen where, I've had to step up for my sister and say, no, she's not lying. This is exactly what happened. So yeah, those are several things that I've seen when it comes to the distinctions.
Very good. I appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Sharon Brooks Green.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Derek Krim. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad that you're here, Antonio, and you too, Sasha. So happy that you all are talking about this, that we're all here talking about this at this forum this year. I heard lots of stuff in your presentations, and I have so many questions of my own, but I noticed that our general audience have a lot of questions too. So I'll be brief with mine. And I'll start with you, Antonio, and start by saying that I'm sorry to hear that you were handcuffed at 7 years old. I can't imagine my children being handcuffed at 7 years old, or what my reaction would have been as a parent. I really think I would have, I don't know. I don't even want to imagine it. It's heart-wrenching to even think about. But I do want to know, you mentioned that it had a long-term effect on you. It got you numb to the idea or even used to the idea of being handcuffed or going to jail or prison. So my question to you today is that that's not a common thing these days. I have a few grandchildren now. I haven't heard of any of them or their friends being handcuffed. So I'm going to take a leap and say that it's not a common thing anymore in our state. It probably still happens, but it's not common. But what policy, in the policy state of mind, what would you suggest that we put in place, Antonio, to make it a non-entity in our state at all? It shouldn't even be a consideration in normal circumstances?
I think first and foremost, police officers shouldn't be dealing with kids, period. In our schools, I remember, this cop always being, in the halls, and they would get called whenever there were fights, whenever there were. They moved later on as I got older. They moved into like hall monitors that didn't have guns, weren't cops. Some of them were retired cops or off-duty cops though. But I honestly believe that, we have to be honest with the mass shootings and the school shootings and stuff. We do need some type of presence there. But when it comes to like in the school and responding to a fight in the classroom, a outburst in the classroom, no cop should be responding to that. We need to have trained people from our community who know how to respond to our kids with love. The same way you would respond to your own kid, not like you seeing this kid as an adult, as a threat, and that's what these police do in our schools. They look at our kids as threats, as animals, to be quite honest. So they're never going to respond with that humanity or with love.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Brooks Green, can I just chime in on that?
Please
really
do,
quickly?
please do.
Yeah, I think it's important, and I want to look up the legislation, but I know, currently in Minnesota, you can't be charged for a crime if you're under the age of 10, which feels also sort of crazy, right? And there's work being done to try to raise that age to the age of 12. And it's being contested by by some people in our society. And so I think, again, when we think about policy, procedure, and how systems are designed, what does that say, right? Like, if we can't see a 12-year-old as still being a child and deserving a child's treatment, we've got a lot of work to do from a societal and value standpoint. So I just wanted to ping that, and I'll try to find the legislation so that I can share it either in the chat or for the follow-up information.
Thank you for that, Sasha. That's important to know what currently exists so that we know what we're facing today, a school day. So thank you so much for sharing that. My second question, and then I'll move on to the audience because there's some questions there too. I'm going to post what was on my mind and you all can take a look at it. And what it's generally saying is that when I grew up, you got a whooping for acting up in school. And then you got fed dinner. There was love. And every parent on the block knew what you did in school and they got involved. You either got another whooping or you got a harsh looking at or a talking to. And then every kid on the block knew about it, that you got the whooping or the harsh talking to. Is anybody with me on this? Y'all feeling this? Okay. And I want to know at which point, and this is for both of you, I'm going to start with you, Sasha. At which point do you think that we're too dependent on the system and its money and resources other than the family in ending some of the violence that's going on in our communities right now that result in incarceration and even death?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think that the systems work in such a way that they break down the family to create dependence on systems. So there's a deep interplay. I think, for me, I definitely grew up in a community of care and accountability. My parents were not big spankers, but there was plenty of accountability and, punishment. And I got a couple spankings, but not a lot. But that sort of sense of accountability, and I grew up in a very religious household, so there was also a sense of accountability just for behavior that is, Christ-like, right? In the sense that you should do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and because it honors who you are, it honors your family, it honors your community. So again, getting back to that sense of belonging that you talked about, Antonio, I think I was very fortunate to grow up. I'm a proud Rondo kid. I'm a third generation Rondo kid, post destruction, but we still really lift that up as a part of who we are as children of Rondo. And so there was that sense of like, people will know, and people, I remember once as a child, and I didn't do this, but somebody called my grandma and said they saw me smoking while I was walking from the bus stop. And by the time I got home, the whole neighborhood, my whole family was like, there was this sense of shame and accountability and, oh God, I got to go to church on Sunday and people are going to think that I did this thing, right? So this community standard, right, that has been missing. And that is deeply rooted in who we are as people. And it's definitely rooted in who we are as people of the global majority, right? As Black and Brown people, that sense of kinship is so deeply woven in who we are. And we've been robbed of it culturally as we've assimilated to dominant culture here in the United States. And so, yes, there's an overdependency on systems. I also think, just to caveat, I think we have to be careful when we talk about discipline, because we know over-disciplining our children is a byproduct of the historical trauma we experienced in slavery. So sometimes we have had an overrun thing that worked at one time and maybe doesn't work, because sometimes the youth are not beating their children as a consequence, right? But I think over-reliance on spankings can also lead to bad outcomes, because kids learn that the way to solve problems is to hit somebody, right? Or the way to show people that you mean business is to hit them. So I think we have to think about all the tools in our toolbox. That's not to say that spankings are inappropriate or good or bad, right? But I think we do have to be mindful of how, where, and when we use it.
Thank you, Sasha, for sharing that. And Antonio, I'd like to hear your perspective, but I want to interject Dr. Derek in there and ask that you comment and take over from here.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sharon Brooks Green. Again, these mornings go by very quick, and we have many people from the community and different disciplines who've joined us, and want to get some of their questions. I actually want to go to a question, and I think is a very good one, by Emily Crandall, and because it kind of leads into our next session, but she talks about, how do we get involved with your, thinking about Sasha, nonprofits and correcting the correction systems. But she's talking about as students. And she states that she is a junior at SMU-MN. I'm not quite sure what college that is, or university, but we get the point. And I wanted to bring this because the students, right? And I would even just elaborate more, not only nonprofits, but community initiatives, community spaces, advocacy. So Antonio, let's start out with you first.
Yeah, can I answer that last piece that Sharon?
Yes,
quickly.
Yeah.
I do so again, it goes back to the village. We all have to be a part of helping raise our kids. That includes the discipline aspect of it. But like Sasha pointed out, like, we have to be careful of over disciplining. Like, to be like honest, I was brutalized by my dad. And so if whatever level of discipline didn't reach that, it had no effect. So once you take it too far, then there is no coming back, or it takes a lot to come back from that. So we have to be careful how far we're taking the discipline. And like, Sasha and Sharon said, we have to be creative with it. There's many kids are getting these, social media stuff, these expensive phones, games, all that. We can take away that stuff. We can exercise them, push-ups.
Turn that Wi-Fi off. That's like those kryptonite.
Sit in the corner. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that. And then we have parents too that are like, don't tell me how to be a mom. Don't tell me how to be a dad. And it's like, we gotta humble ourselves. We got to humble ourselves, allow that constructive feedback, criticism, as long as it's in the best interest of your child. You should be open and hearing it, no matter who it's coming from, but especially if it's coming from someone who lives in the neighborhood with you. And interacts with your kids, whose kids interact with your kids, right? You would want them to, give you some advice and feedback. And can you briefly remind me of your question, Derek? Because you touched on that.
So the question was from a student. And I think that it is really about, okay, I see, now I want to get involved, right? And she talked about nonprofits, thinking about how, the work that Sasha does, but then I expanded, I just said, community, nonprofits and in the community, but the whole thing is action and getting involved to make that change, right? Same thing you did.
Absolutely. Great question. And that's what I love to hear. How can I get involved? When people ask me this, I always tell them, show up. Some people do their surfing on the internets and they do the social media stuff. And it's like, well, I mean, from the news, you can tell what neighborhoods, people who are affected by these things are living in. Show up. And I'm a canvas director. So like, I talk to people every day. That's my job. I go and I talk to people. I interact with people. I go and knock on doors. I'm in the communities and I meet so many people, so many wonderful people. And I connect with so many wonderful people. And when people like first hear me talk and they're like, wow, oh my God. And it's like, yeah, you didn't know, like, we're out here. We love people, we love our community. Yeah, we're out here. And you would never know that if you don't come into the neighborhood. So like, come into the neighborhood, you're gonna bump into, and yes, during those protests, march and rallies, yeah. But in between those moments is where the real work be happening. In between those moments is where a lot of those beautiful, networking and connecting sessions happen. Come into the community. You'll hear names. You'll hear Dr. Raj being talked about. You'll hear Marsha Howard. Sometimes you might hear my name. You'll hear Jason Soul. You'll hear Kevin Reese. You'll hear Eliza Darius. You'll hear these people. And you're like, who are these? And then you can get contact. Oh, Dr. Raj gives my number out all the time. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it because I want to connect with people. I want people to get involved. And showing up here at these Zooms, these are platforms that we're able to connect on. So there's so many different ways, but the number one, show up.
Show up. Thank you, Sasha. I have to let you get in here because Emily is really talking about correcting the correction system, right? With things that are in place. And I know you're doing that exactly where you're at. Anything you want to add?
Well, we certainly are trying, but I think that we have to understand, one, I really strongly encourage people to get deeply involved in understanding how the civics of where you live work. Because so often people are going to the wrong place to advocate for a thing that they want, and it gives our systems an out, right? They're like, we don't have jurisdiction over that, so bye, right? And they never really have to help you navigate. So to the degree that you can understand your local government at the city level, your county government, your state government, your federal government, and at the state and federal level, really getting involved at the state legislature, understanding the committee related to public safety, understanding who is the commissioner of corrections, what are his policies, right? And local government is really important because oftentimes what council members and our mayor hear from are activism groups who have, a solid base and understanding of what they're thinking about. But so often the power of the people is rooted in individuals who have thought about something, care about something, but never come to the forefront and say, hey, this is what I think. So then it gets diluted because it's like, oh, these are just policy agenda groups. It's not like the real people. And so I think it's really important to come to a city council meeting and say, hey, this is really what's important to me, or to go to a county commissioner meeting and say, as a student who's going to be working and doing, living in this community for the next 60 years, this is what I want to see for the future of public safety or corrections or whatever topic you care about. I agree with Antonio also, though, it is really about showing up, right? And being willing to get your hands dirty. We're actually doing training right now this week with Cure Violence. So that's our interrupter model. We've got staff from Cure Violence Global here training our interrupters as a third follow-up training. And one of the things that they've said is, our interrupters can't be the ones who are doing the things. When we host an event, they need to be engaging with the high-risk population to talk about de-escalating the violence. We need volunteers to DJ. We need volunteers to hand out food. We need volunteers to pass out flyers, because their job is to be deeply connected with those people who are involved with the violence. And they can't do that if they are flipping burgers while we're at a barbecue, right? We need those barbecues to connect those folks, but we need other people to help us. So there's lots of ways to plug in. I just encourage you to find a thing you care about and reach out to an organization that's doing that work and find a way to plug in.
Sasha, thank you so much. I do want to let you know that a small percentage of your communication is still breaking up a little bit. We did get a recommendation from my colleague, Watson Anderson, that turning off your video may help, but we did get the majority of what you were saying. Thank you so much. That is very powerful. I know our time is short, so I'm gonna turn it back over to my colleague, Dr. Sharon Brooks Green.
Well, thank you, Dr. Derek. We had some really interesting conversations in the chat here that I've noticed. David Starks made the point he wanted to talk about the effect of not being able to interact with those on parole for you, Antonio. And I thought that that was profound. How could you avoid that when we know that there are mass people who are in that situation, and you probably walk past every day or say hello, and even a few of the names that you just named are currently on parole. So I want you to just talk briefly about that. And I wanted some people from our audience here to put your thoughts about that in the chat too.
So my mom is a felon. My dad is a felon. My oldest brother is a felon. My oldest sister is a felon. I'm a felon. And most of them are still on parole right now, including myself. And specifically to talk about, the people I left, because I saw that in the chat, the people who are still incarcerated, who I've built relationships with on the inside. I think that was more specifically the question. It is extremely hard because you want to go in and visit. You can't visit until you're on parole. You can request it, but it's rare that it gets approved. But this is a part of the system where they want you isolated. They don't want you to have support systems. That is really what it is. And that is an extension of it, where a person like myself who has truly transitioned and transformed into a great person, who has a lot to offer someone who may be on the fence, who may be wanting to, but needs a little bit of inspiration, needs to see that it actually is for them, that it works. I would be the perfect person. Kevin Reese, Eliza, these people would be perfect people to be interacting and have, quite honestly, carte blanche access to those facilities to go in and talk to people. And it limits other people's transformation, because we could be accelerating this process of healing, because that's what it boils down to, is healing, helping other people heal. And even while we're out here, so other people who are not, who are on parole, and you can't live in the same house as your mom. That may be the only address I got to get released to, but because my mom went to prison, and has a felony, I can't go live with my mom. That's crazy. What sense does that make? Now I could see maybe if they committed the crime together, then we could rethink that, but that isn't happening like that. So it's limiting that growth. stunting that growth and preventing it, quite honestly.
Wow, thank you for sharing. It's even unrealistic when you mention so many people in your family. This is your family. And it seems like an unrealistic policy that needs to be addressed. And Sasha, I'm going to direct that same question to you on a policy level. I don't know if it's from the city or from our state that policy exists, but how would you, what do you have to say about the same question that I just asked? Are you there, Sasha? Okay.
Yep, I'm here. I'm sorry. I was trying to get off of mute. I'm gonna see if I moved around, so maybe I can be on camera.
Oh, okay.
I think that, our current system, because it is designed to punish, in my opinion, right? It feels like a lot of what we do is punitive, even though there may be granules of why there's value in saying, yes, if you committed a crime with someone, or these people are going to have influence in getting you to do something wrong while you're being released, it needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, because there is power in shared experience. And sometimes that power can be used for great things. And so if we just always are drawing sort of this definitive line and saying, you can't be around these people because you have this same or similar experience, if I was told I didn't find my true happiness until I was linked to Black and brown women who had same and similar experiences to me, right? I couldn't be my best self without those relationships. And so for people who have been incarcerated to not be able to link with other people who have had that same experience and come out the other side and are doing better and trying to improve their lives and are trying to contribute to their communities, it's immensely problematic. And it does feel like it's often just used as a tool to do further punishing. And so I think we really, again, have to evaluate our systems and why we have the things that we have in place, why are they there? And how can they be adjusted to be more meaningful and effective? Because we know right now, it can't be fully enforced, right? So it's still arbitrarily enforced. And therefore, it really can be used by individual probation officers and judges as a tool to punish people and not necessarily to even reach whatever the ideal outcome is, which is theoretically to keep our communities safer.
Great.
Thank you so much for that, Sasha. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Theresa Libby.
Thank you. Wow, this has been amazing. Sasha Cotton, Antonio Williams, just so appreciate all your contributions, all your experience, and speaking from head, heart, and hands. And also want to thank Dr. Raj and Dr. Krim and Dr. Brooks Green. What we're going to do now is take a break. It is 10:12. We'll take 10 minutes. So we'll see you back here at 10:22. But before you go, I want to let you know that there are some Zoom issues that we're having here on the back end. If you come back and find out that you've been kicked out of the meeting, please just log back on. We'll be sure to admit you right away. And yeah, just please give it up for Antonio Williams and Sasha Cotton. Everything that you've contributed today has been just tremendous. Thank you so, so much. Can't thank you enough. All right. Great. Thanks. Everyone enjoy the break. We'll see you back here in about 10 minutes for the breakout rooms.